Awesome. Thank you so much, Ginger. Hey guys, thanks so much for calling in. I know you guys are all probably pretty busy, but I'm super excited to chat about inclusive mobility with you guys. Please, please, please write your questions in the chat or think about some things you want to talk about afterward. I'm excited about the conversation that we're going to have once I stop talking. So my name is Bernadette Berger. I'm Associate Creative Director at Teague. If you haven't heard about Teague, we design at the intersection of travel and technology. And our big mission is to create mobility for all. So my background is in industrial design. I studied at the University of Washington, and go Dogs. And even though I started in industrial design, my career has taken me through lighting, materials, audio, digital experiences. So really, in a nutshell, what I do is I create future travel experiences. And I love travel. I miss travel. I think that travel is a great way to unlock new futures, new opportunities, new ideas. But there's also a downside of travel. For a lot of people, this is what travel looks and feels like. Travel can be painful, it can be humiliating, it can be dangerous. And so the reality for today is mobility is not accessible. And it's our job as leaders in design and business and innovation to change that and to create a system that's more inclusive for all. The travel and tech industry has been under a lot of scrutiny for a pretty homogenous culture. There's been a lot of effort to change that. But really, there's a lot of sort of cultural and systemic things that have made it in that way. And a problem there is that if you have too many voices with the same background, ripe opportunities are never unveiled, they're never discovered, and they never move forward. And it's really too bad because diverse teams are more profitable. I love this McKinsey study that beautifully illuminates the benefits to having a more diverse executive team. Gender diverse executive teams were 21% more profitable than their competitors in the same industry. And ethnically diverse executive teams were 33% more profitable than their competitors in the same industry. So diverse teams are better for design, they're better for business, and they're better for the bottom line. When we have this singular viewpoint in business or the singular viewpoint in design, it can unintentionally shape systemic oppression for the user groups that are excluded. And as leaders in design and in technology, it's our job to really consider how our designs and how our work might unintentionally shape some of these systems of oppression at many levels. And this is top of mind for many mobility businesses and mobility organizations. It's especially important for public transit. So I'm here in Seattle. I'm assuming a lot of you guys are here in the Pacific Northwest, but for any of you that don't know, in Seattle, we have a public transportation system provided by King County Metro. And even this system can have life-changing effects. I spoke with Christina Auclair. She's the Mobility Division Director for King County Metro. She's got a fascinating view on mobility. She doesn't see it as a service. She sees it as a human right. She talks a lot about the power that public transit has to oppress or to lift people out of poverty, and that those who are affected by transportation policy, many times they have the least say in them. Without this expert insight from the most vulnerable populations, design can overlook and even cause harm to the people it seeks to serve. And that's why inclusive mobility is so crucial. So with an approach in inclusive mobility, innovative brands can unlock better service, new services, new products. They can unlock new customers and streams of revenue, and they can forge brand loyalty with services that are designed to serve all. So in the short time I have with you this afternoon, I'm just going to talk about 3 opportunities that are 3 ways that you can adopt inclusive design into your approach and methodologies today. The first is defining priority users. The second is infusing empathy. And the third is using equity as a strategy. So let's jump into it. So the first opportunity is defining and naming the users that are left out. Starting a new business initiative or launching a new product or service is really challenging. And one of the most important steps is to define your intended users. No tool is one size fits all. Some of the best products and services were actually designed with a niche user in mind. But in mobility, there can be real winners and losers when we have these trade-offs in the design process. So the goal here is to avoid the pitfalls of generalizing, of designing for the majority or designing for the average. Brands must deeply dive into understanding who their users are and who's not being fully served by the system. So in Seattle, we have a great melting pot. We attract people from all around the world. We have a sort of rich and diverse immigrant population. And King County Metro, as the public transportation system, has a real challenge in understanding how to better serve this diverse group. And to focus on these underserved communities, they gave their immigrant population the title of priority populations. So already in naming this user group, you can start to understand how a priority population might be talked about differently or considered differently when making organization and business decisions. So instead of grouping all immigrants together into one homogeneous group, King County Metro got really curious about who the individuals were within this group. Specifically, they wanted to focus in on limited English speakers because limited English speakers were not being served properly by the public transit system. Today, King County Metro offers print and digital products that can explain the Metro system in many different languages, but they still had a big problem. They couldn't solve for the stress and the fear and the indignities of getting lost in the bus system without the use of your native language for guidance. So that's when they got curious. And they dove deeper into this diverse group and discovered that there was an interesting commonality across nationalities and across languages. And that was a shared value in generational learning. So many of their riders that were in these priority populations, they were riding with kids, they were riding as a family. So what they did is they reached out to the Seattle public school system, and they were teaching kids at school how to interact with the Metro system, how to safely ride, how to get an Orca card. And therefore, the students were then teaching their parents, their aunties, their grandparents, how to use the bus system. And it activated many immigrant families to fold public transit into their daily lives. So the second opportunity is to infuse empathy in the decision-making process. Stats can be really soulless, and just because we have a lot of data doesn't necessarily mean we have a lot of insightful, actionable information. It's impossible to ignore things that are more personal. It's impossible to ignore the real stories and lived experiences. And that's why we see ethnographic research as so important in creating equity through design. Nothing's as powerful as boots on the ground research, where you're walking with real people, you're hearing their real stories, you're witnessing the indignities and the drops in the system. And those real life experiences are the things that teams need in order to unlock meaningful change. At Teague, that's why we value ethnographic research methodologies, and we make that such a priority. When we do this in aviation, we call this fly-alongs. So we will fly on long trips around the world to observe passengers and travelers struggling in the system, to do intercept interviews, to ask flight attendants or passengers why they're doing what they're doing, just to understand some of the complexities of travel. One of those instances that I will never forget was talking to a mom who was traveling with her young son who was in a wheelchair. And she was telling me about all these things that she was doing to prepare herself for the stress and the uncertainty and possibly the danger that her son might be in on this travel journey. And that for her, all of that was worth it just so that she could go on a vacation with her family. So these experiences and these stories, they hold weight. And when you come back into the office and you're making decisions, those stories, they're there and they continue to influence the decisions that are being made long after the trip. We then take those stories and we put them into what we call journey maps. This is where we visually map out where the pain points are for different users during different stages of the travel journey. And this way we can really visualize what are the meaningful pain points for who, at what moment, how might they inform better products and services, and how can we prioritize the specific needs of underrepresented users. A great example here is Lyft and their efforts to meet the needs for women and minority drivers and passengers in their ride-sharing app. Building empathy for them is paramount to the success of their ride-sharing app and for safety in general. So when they took a look at ways that they could make ride-sharing safer for women and minorities, they did that through partnerships. So they created a safety advisory council and invited experts from women-based groups and sheriffs and safety-based groups to come to the design table and illuminate the gaps that Lyft already had in their product and highlight new solutions from a unique vantage point. One of those examples was the 911 button. So in Lyft's app, you can call 911 while you're still in the app if you ever feel unsafe. But heartbreakingly, that is not a great option for every user and every driver. As the Washington Post has illuminated and other news outlets have illuminated, African Americans are at greater risk of being wrongfully arrested when they call 911, even if it's in their own defense. So knowing that that might not be the right safety solution for every user, Lyft also created a parallel safety net, which is a social safety net. So in the app, you can choose to share the vehicle information, your route, and also your location with one of your friends or your family members to increase safety, but also to increase accountability for everybody. So the last opportunity is using equity as a strategy. And this one has been proven over and over to create better products and services, to unlock new customers and revenue, and to really forge that brand loyalty. This one I love. This is the OXO effect. So if you know the OXO story, you'll know that OXO's founder, Sam Farber, he was watching his wife try to peel with a vegetable peeler, and she had mild arthritis, and she was really struggling to hold on to the handle. So he knew that there was an opportunity in designing a better handle for people who had arthritis. But come to find out that many users with many abilities also really enjoyed the wider grip of this larger handle. Sometimes when a design is targeted for one niche user group, it can also bring an improved experience for many other users. The second opportunity here is unlocking new customers. So a 2015 study revealed that 40% of all travel by passengers that declared themselves as disabled were on airplanes. So only 40% of those trips were on airplanes. And of those trips, those passengers spent a collective $9 billion in just 2 years. So how many new customers might be waiting in the wings, waiting for their chance to travel in a system that's more accessible and more inclusive to their needs? And lastly is brand loyalty. Brands are facing increasing pressure from their customers to acknowledge systemic racism, do more for disadvantaged groups, use their powers for good. And this is increasingly important for consumers that are growing, which are millennials and Gen Z. They're expecting their companies to also also, the brands that they support to also have social responsibility. Good design is design for all, and design for all is good for business. So using equity as a strategy towards innovation, what it really means is taking responsibility for our contribution to an inequitable system and putting proactive effort into products and services that meet the needs of more users. And what it won't look like is a Band-Aid. As we all know, Band-Aids, they're more costly, they're more disruptive, and they detract from brand values. But solutions that are brand active can be inclusive to the users that are typically left out of the system and also improve the overall experience for all. So in conclusion, we are living in tumultuous times right now. But the brands who do take this time to reflect, to really consider how they contribute to the system, and that plan for meaningful design that strikes at the hearts and minds of their users today and their users tomorrow will really come out as clear winners from this pandemic. So I really appreciate having this conversation with you guys. I care a lot about this topic, and I would really love to continue this conversation with you all. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Bernadette. And I just want to remind everyone to go ahead and get questions rolling into the chat, or if you feel comfortable, you can come off mute and we can get that going as an audio dialogue. I'm going to go ahead and get started with a little bit of thoughts that I had. So inclusive design, I think, is a term that's becoming more regular and in the vernacular of designers. How would you differentiate it from an older term like universal design, which was very much in the vernacular already, or when we talk about accessibility? Mm-hmm. How would you differentiate those definitions?
Yeah, that's such a good question. We've had this conversation a lot, especially as we work in multidisciplinary teams. So someone coming from a classic industrial design background, what we were taught was accessibility, universal design, taking a look at ergonomics, right? And a lot of that ends up being trying to make the most for sort of the middle, and then having sort of these specific solutions that are targeted to accessible and ADA, perhaps someone in a wheelchair, or Braille for someone who can't read. One of the challenges there is it's not always tied to metrics and a use case in the same way that usability is. So usability and usable design coming out of UX and more digital products, many times those are very metric driven. We're going through these steps and we're measuring the time it takes or how many hangups people have or errors people have. Great that you can measure the benefit there, but those ones also have their own pitfall. So we've been having a lot of these conversations about what could we take from industrial design, architecture, UX, and digital products and start to create a common language that can identify users that are not being served without generalizing, that can drive towards metrics so that you know when you're successful, but also have some more of this like iterative embedded in the design, the core design product, and not as sort of like an add-on, like, you know, like a wheelchair elevator might be.
Totally, thank you. We've got a question here from Thomas, a co-member of the board. He's asking, how do we make sure that inclusiveness becomes part of the core value and not just ending up as another marketing tool?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. You know, something that I'm trying to learn more about each day is how these big changes can't come from any one initiative. They come from hiring strategies and leadership strategies. They come from client values and design principles. They come from the types of people we recruit in our user studies. They come in how we evaluate our designs. They come at every level, and I think there's an opportunity for a strategy at every level, so that it starts to become more core and less of an add-on, and even worse, a sales campaign.
Thanks for the answer. It's I think that's like spot on. I think you're talking about a cultural change, and I think maybe that is also what I was like looking for when I would answer my own question, and that's so good to hear, because I think that's so much reflecting of what could happen right now. I do not say it. I mean, it started to happen. So as me not being an American coming from Europe, seeing what's going on and all these opportunities, like it's very interesting. And yeah, I think a cultural shift towards like is the only way to get to that level. Yeah, thanks also for an awesome presentation.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really feel like the measurable qualities, at least in the industry, especially with aviation, and Herman can attest to this, one of the phrases is, it's got to buy itself on the plane, right? And so you're always, every design choice that's for a user experience is always having to be measured against the weight it will add to the plane, the manufacturing complexity or cost, the maintenance time. So any amount of measurability that can hold its own against an engineering requirement, I think is the most actionable thing that sort of, as designers, that we can seek to bring into our own practice.
Looks like we have a question from Magnus. Also, hi, because I don't think I've seen you for 6-7 years.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I think I got 6 or 7 years older. Bernadette, great to see you. I enjoyed your presentation. My question is, 9/11 had a great effect on air travel or travel in general, with a negative effect on inclusive mobility. Now with COVID, it probably will have similar effects. And I wonder how you prepare to maintain kind of, or improve standards in the post-COVID era.
Yeah, I love this one. And also I love your stripes, wearing stripes today. So we've had this conversation of how can we improve the travel experience for, and future-proof for pandemics, and not create another TSA. Right, in the knee-jerk reaction from 9/11, we got TSA in the sort of current form, and it's incredibly undignifying for people. I think even for the people who are working for TSA, I think it's a really hard job. So again, I think it really comes back to thinking through from a core, how can you design for true cleanability? How can you design for better airflow and better air quality? And how can you design for the perception of cleanliness, so people also feel more at ease? It's already quite stressful going through an airport and getting on an airplane and going up many miles in the air. Right. And I think we've all seen, I've seen it at my grocery store, people that freak out if you get too close to them. A lot of that's perception, right? They're in stress. So breaking out what actually creates a more cleanable and easy to clean cabin space, and what can benefit people's perception of cleanliness and safety, I think have to be woven into every aspect of future interiors and retrofit onto the whole fleet of existing interiors. We have a product that Teague's developed called Air Shield, and it's a really easy snap-on piece that will create a cone of air around you, because a lot of the concern with COVID is that the disease is transmissible through the air, right? So if you have a downward flow of air around you, it's going to be harder for somebody else's virus to kind of waft into your space, right? Incredibly effective at reducing transmission, but it's invisible. It doesn't help me feel like I'm more protected. So we have to find things that work together.
I think Glenn had a question.
So I just want to chime in here because I think that the airplane is such a fascinating product for cleanliness, because when we're designing for airplanes, is that the airplane actually, when it takes off, it actually bends like a banana. And so there's a ton of gaps when you have to consider designing for every panel, because there's tons of gaps, and gaps trap a lot of dirt. So designing the future of aviation is I'm really excited to see where Teague takes it, because when I was there, we were trying to minimize gaps. We were trying to create tight radiuses, but the reality for cleanability, you know, if you look at a housing market or architecture, is that the medical facilities have big round fillets or baseboards, because then people can just mop it super easily. So it's actually almost moving towards a solution that gets a bit more, you know, when I left, it was like really tight, really precise, to something that's actually a lot more, you could say cartoony, right? So it changes the aesthetic actually approach.
Yeah, and a hospital one is super interesting. When you think about perception of cleanliness, where are the only places in the world where you interact with white textured plastic? It's on like handles at hospital beds, and it's on bins on airplanes, and it's on, you know, subway panels. Like, it's all these like very public, but also known to be very dirty places. So the material is meant to not look dirty. That's why it's textured in that way. But psychologically, it makes you already think you're in a dirty place. Whereas if you had maybe darker materials or some other type of intentional patterned texture that gave you more residential or automotive inspired materials and sort of, you know, impressions and perception of where you are, instead of being like, I'm in a hospital right now, I'm in the hospital in the air.
All right, thank you. Glenn, I think you had a question.
Actually, I wanted to comment on that last thing, and then I'll ask my question. That's a very good point. I think the good presentation, Bernadette, the fact that it should be a core value. I recall at Airbus, actually, with the luggage bins, and they put in newspaper racks, especially on Lufthansa, and the ink would come off the fingers onto the bins and have these black streaks going down the cabin. And they were playing with clever paint. So the texture is very, very important on a white surface. You're very correct. There's nothing worse than seeing all these black streaks on the luggage bins. But moving on to the disability side, have you guys considered that when everything's touchless, it's terrible when you're blind? I think a lot of designers haven't really thought that bit through, and I thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, no, that's a huge concern, and it's well documented that many users that are in sort of the persons of reduced mobility category, they will put themselves at great physical stress to avoid using the bathroom on the plane. They will not eat for the whole day and not drink for the whole day before they fly. That's terrible. Right? That's like, you think about that, like in any other situation, it's really, that's not meeting the needs. That's not serving those users, right? So for thinking about the interaction of a space that's touchless, many of the touchless spaces are in the lab today. We have to consider the many ways you might be able to activate a flush button, or a faucet, or a lav door, or know if the lav is available or not. There needs to be multiple ways, because not only might the user not have the ability to see or hear or read that language, or they're just stressed out and they can't tell how to activate the toilet. Though having multiple ways to fulfill the same activity will be better beneficial for those user groups like you mentioned, but for many other people as well.
Looks like we have a question here from Lulu. I actually share this question. So she's asking, as a young designer, how can I push leadership to value inclusivity if it is not a priority in the company? So a little low on the totem pole problem there.
Bring it up. Be the squeaky wheel. Be the person that always asks a question. Nobody asks questions. I was just in sort of my prep this morning, I was reading an article that Airbus hosted a 2.5-day summit with all their leaders. And at the end of this lovely summit, one of the reporters stood up and said, "Hey, can you tell me why there wasn't a single woman presenting in your 2.5 days of content? Can you tell me why you have such lack of diversity in your leadership team? I'm interested to hear your answer." You can do it in a completely respectful way. Teague is a very old company, and we have finally gotten a woman board on our board of directors. It was one of the questions I asked at one of our meetings. Why don't we have any representation on our board of directors? So there's respectful ways that you can ask thoughtful questions and bring it up. And as a young designer, I would not shy away from that. I think it's important.
I would love to chime in here, because I remember the time when I was just started, and sustainability was one of the things that everyone pushed for. And I think one way is for young designers is to actually just do it. Design it inclusive and talk about it rather than asking for permission. So what we did sometimes was not using any chemicals in the assembly process. And we never talked about it. We just tried to achieve that. And when we achieved it, we'd start talking about it. So that's maybe one way, is don't ask for permission, just try and do it and be smart, because if it is really cool, they would be stupid to say no.
That's a good point. Let's see, Philip here asks, when designing for inclusive mobility, especially during the COVID crisis, how might designing trust aid in building the confidence needed for customers to feel inclusion was actually delivered?
Okay, hold on a second.
There's a lot there.
When designing for inclusive mobility, especially during COVID, how might designing trust aid in building confidence needed for customers to feel inclusion was delivered? Philip, can you elaborate on that one? Help me out. Help me understand what you're asking.
Hey, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was a quick little follow-up on some of the mention earlier about some of the airline examples that you guys brought up on how to control airflow. It's one thing to kind of communicate solutions that's provided, but how do you really convince customers that that is something that they can feel confident about? Because someone's on the other end kind of hearing this potential story that they're being told, but how can they really feel confident before really signing up and buying a ticket, for example?
Yeah, there are some really fascinating drivers of perception, and knowing and understanding those and how they are created is a fantastic tool. One of the ones that I talk about is the perception of personal. When you go into a hotel room and there is the bed sheets, and if they're rumpled at all, you now all of a sudden feel like that is no longer your personal room. Like there's evidence of someone else who's been in that room. Any evidence of someone else having been sitting in that economy seat or that first class seat before you got there now makes you feel like that whole space is dirty because there's evidence that there was someone else there. You find a piece of hair, you find a fingernail, you see the little like butt divot in the seat. So any of those design tactics that can erase the evidence that someone else was ever there, visually, through tactile, was it warm when you sat down? All those things contribute to your sense of cleanliness, but it's a perception that this is your personal space. So there's a lot of things that we study, perception of privacy, perception of ownership, that are really strong on the airplane that can help with the challenges of giving people trust in that their space is actually clean and safe.
Thank you for that really visceral answer. I had some follow-up on that because it was reminding me about that, especially right now, we have a lot of difference of opinion on what's trustworthy information. And so I think you touched on some universal feelings that people have regarding their personal space and privacy. But how will these solutions approach, instilling trust in terms of like, this solution works similar to telling people to wear a mask or, things like that?
That's really tough, unless you literally tell them, and that's why you see ads that mention the HEPA filters on planes. The air in the plane is actually probably some of the cleanest air you can be breathing, but you can't see it. Antimicrobial surfaces are some of the cleanest surfaces that you can touch, but visually people rate them as looking dirtier than just smooth, non-textured matte plastic. So we use every sense to determine if we're safe, to determine if something's clean. And safety and cleanliness are right up there with like core needs to feel comfortable as a mammal, as a human. So it's really diving into and studying and refining. Is it the visual quality of this that makes people feel safe? Is it the tactile feeling of air coming off of them that makes them feel safe? This is a very comforting thing, right? The wrapping. Anyone who has a child knows that the wrapping is a very comforting thing, right? So it's actually quite successful at giving people the perception of safety is wearing a mask. And luckily, it also helps you be safer. So how the airplane contributes to that, it has to be multi-sensorial, and it has to, it's refinement. It's not big sweeping things, it's refinement.
So I think I also had a question about, oh no, we got something come in. I think the perception of inclusive design and sustainable design is that it often comes with an increased price tag. It's kind of a nice to have rather than a requirement. How do you convince clients to value this and write the checks and make inclusivity more of a requirement? Thank you, Ryan, that question.
Yes, yeah, and this is even more challenging in the aviation space because it's so unregulated. It's not, there's no legal requirement for there to be an ADA or accessible lavatory on an airplane in the United States. It's not required. So it's up to the airline to decide if they want to even provide a lavatory that all their passengers can use. So it's really, they're making these as business decisions, and they're looking at the stats and the data, right? And that's where I lean into those personal stories and those photos of real people and the videos of real people in the mock-up struggling to find their seat and struggling to access the bin and can't figure out how to open up that lavatory door, that's when that qualitative data can help counter against that quantitative data, which it's easy to measure. It's easy to measure the business impact or the weight or the manufacturing cost. Sustainability, it's another level of complexity because it also gets into, you know, the chemicals and the material fabrication. It gets into, is this easy to disassemble and recycle? Airplane interiors, everything about the airplane can be recycled except for the interior. So it's a big uphill battle. I love what Thomas said about just doing it and making it one of your metrics. You might not get there as far, but you can push for it because that's part of being a consultant, is you encourage your clients. But the other one is to make your own metrics, make your own qualitative metrics to give weight to what matters.
Cool. Do you think we see a shift towards more local, national travel in the future? Oh, wow. Someone's been writing a novel. So first let's get to Thomas's question about the shift to local, I think, national domestic travel, as opposed to international. Correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas.
Yeah, so I think, oh, go ahead, Thomas, you can elaborate.
It's just more like the curiosity of like, will we fly that much in the future, or will we like go back to other like more private ways or other public ways? It was just like more, do we see a shift there, or is it just being like super reactive right now asking this question?
Yeah, so we've seen a very fascinating surge in travel for especially people in the DINK category, dual income, no kids, or folks that have the income to travel, the flexibility of a job to travel, and they don't have any tie downs of a home or children. So there's actually a fascinating spike there. And that's why you see a lot of airplanes and airports are actually interestingly full. A lot of the polls that I've seen are that the majority of the flying population will return once they have vaccines. That once people have vaccines, that they'll feel more comfortable to start up sort of flying more like normal. It's just the whole aviation industry will change. We will not have these experiences of flying on A380s, which are the big double-decker planes, or 747, which is the deck and a half planes. They'll be retired, and that'll be the end of that. We will have a lot more travel on smaller planes going directly from our small town to the next small town instead of going through the big hubs. And when you say future, I mean, the future that I'm waiting for is the real rise of autonomous vehicles and Hyperloop that will open up way more options for people to travel other than just flight, so that you can have multiple methods to get to where you want to go, and you have choice for how you want to get there. And I think that will be really healthy for the mobility industry as a whole, because then they'll have greater competition and I think greater offers of price points and service.
Thanks. That was a great answer.
So Katie has a long question here, starting with this background. In apparel and gear, many inclusive design challenges require a high level of customization to provide meaningful solutions. I'd imagine this might be the case in other industries too. Customization logistics can be challenging if the infrastructure isn't already built and is not a priority moving forward in the business. So the question is twofold. Without getting into product specifics, have you encountered this before? And if so, do you have any advice? And I'll let you answer that before we move on to the second half there.
Yeah, so a lot of what our focus is on enabling people to do what they want and providing the support for people to do what they want. So in understanding what people want to do is sort of the key there. And that's where the customization then can come into play. When you're in a shared space and you're trying to find a private place, when you're in a shared space and you're trying to find privacy, when you're in a shared space and you're trying to find community, these are real, when you're in a shared space and it's your job to make food for 200 people, these are real problems that all overlap and intersect at the same time. So a lot of times the customization isn't quite the strategy. It's more of how can you enable as many people to do what they want to do without detracting from other people's ability to do what they want to do. How can you give people a space to soothe a crying baby while still giving a flight attendant space to prep food? How can you make a flight attendant feel like his or her job is very important and meaningful while also giving passengers the feeling like they can reach out to and ask for help from a flight attendant? So I would say that customization isn't quite the tactic we use because we're not selling planes to individual passengers. We're creating a building in the sky that is used by many people with different needs. So it's more of like spheres of enabling, spheres of enablement. Trademark that later on. Okay, so the next one, we did balance what was the right decision for the user with business viability and how you came to solution or built a platform for future solutions. How we came to balance, so essentially balancing user needs and business needs is sort of where I'm seeing. So I'll use an example, and Herman knows this example. There's a lot of requirements on the airplane. It's the most requirement-laden space in the whole world. And those requirements are there for safety, but there's also a big pressure to not create too much change with each design iteration because of the huge investment in tooling and the huge investment in the supply chain. So there was overlapping needs of flight attendants who many times had fake nails. I would love to require every designer who has to design anything for flight attendants has to wear fake nails while they do it. Because you learn a lot when you have fake nails. What you learn is your fingers can't go that deep anymore into an area to turn a knob or to grab a handle because you have these other nails. And like that scratching against like metal or some horrible material is just like gives you chills to your bone. So a lot of the latches and handles and mechanisms that flight attendants have to manipulate all day long are metal and tiny and just horrible and very difficult to deal with fake nails. So Teague was like, oh, we gotta fix this. There's also a requirement that there needs to be 2 locks, double locks, just to make sure a galley cart doesn't fly out of the galley when you take off. And those things are multiple hundreds of pounds and they would just crush anyone in its wake. So a lot of it was also these sort of 2 lock activities, 2 lock activities, 2 lock activities. So what Teague did is we found out that there could be a way that you could make a larger touch point that takes up the space of the 2 locks and have a one-handed mechanism that was a latch and turn. Now you have a 2-step mechanism that doesn't take up more space on the product design, so it's not causing too much change in the supply chain, and it feels better with fake nails, and it looks nice, so it's a win.
Just chiming in there because I was on a few of those projects,
Yeah,
and what we ended up doing also is you look at who the audience is, and for business, it's always about is this more efficient? And the great thing is when you do recognize that, you do these user tests and you collect the data and you realize that turning these quarter turns, they take a while. And when you come up with a solution, you just do a timing test, right? And you do another user test and you say, not only is it ergonomic, but actually it saves, the flight attendants this amount of time. So they're much more efficient on the aircraft. So I think there's a way to justify good design.
Yeah, I love that one. I love that one. And I would say that with the designs that you made, Herman, that I would love to even see, like, just beyond that of like, are you more efficient? It's like, do you value your job more because the environment you're working in is just so much more thoughtful and more considered? And does that translate to better customer service? It's harder to measure, but that kind of thing matters, when people feel like their jobs are meaningful.
So I actually wanted to ask a question. Besides your experience with fake nails, you mentioned that you had all this background in other tertiary fields of design, whether it's color and materials, lighting, obviously your traditional industrial background. Do you think that you required all of that experience to begin taking on inclusivity, or would you, in a different world, just dive straight in?
No, I definitely didn't need to, and I'm learning about it every day. I'm not an expert by any means. I have so much to learn in this field. So I've been in the really fortunate position to learn about audio design and lighting design and materials and projection mapping and video production and all these things on the job. Super fortunate. And that's something that I've really valued at Teague, is they're always looking to invest in their designers to learn other sort of additional skills that benefit the core of industrial design or UX design or engineering. So it's because I have spent time creating audio immersive environments and lighting immersive environments that those are additional tools that I have in thinking about solutions. Every designer has their tools to bring to the party. Everyone's got their own instrument, and then you play together. And those are just the ones that I have. But I do fully believe that it's a multi-sensorial solution. It's not just a vision-based solution. And so any chance that I would encourage, any chance that teams have to dive deeper into understanding and playing with the way that haptics and audio and light and materials and texture can all inform and steer behavior, I would say go for it.
Thank you. It looks like we got one more question from Mark. I think this will be the last question as we're coming up on the hour. A great design intent doesn't always achieve the goal, because once the product is released, it is in the hands of the operators and users who are already filled with their own preconceptions. Inclusivity sometimes comes with more effort work for the operators and patience for other users. How could we make that paradigm shift in each individual that inclusivity is a must?
Yeah, I think this is a blend of the idea that Band-Aids aren't the solution and Thomas's point of just doing it. So when you have that a solution that's got sort of its inclusive thinking to its core, the goal there is that it should work better for all, right? And it's always getting towards better. When we have these Band-Aid solutions, many times they don't even work that great for the person they're intended for, right? So I fully understand the challenges of, working with clients, and sometimes your clients aren't the end user, the end customer as well, right? But as much of that thinking that you can build in, as much of that simplicity and user interaction that you can build in will make for a stronger design and will hopefully navigate any of the pitfalls of misuse from other owners or customers or users of that product or service further down the road. I love that you've got the feeling of responsibility all the way down, and that means that you're doing the right thinking. You're thinking all the way down through the path to the very end user, and that's what it takes.
Cool. Thank you very much. So I think we're up to the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Bernadette, for presenting and hosting this wonderful Q&A. We have a recording that we'll be sending out through the Eventbrite mailers. So thank you so much, and be on the lookout for that. Be on the lookout for our next IDSA Northwest events, and see you all next time.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Have a good one.